Hello, everyone, and welcome to this tutorial on giving a virtual reading. This is sponsored by DELT, the Danish English Literary Translators, and I'm Michael Favala Goldman, poet and translator. I'm going to break this down into 4 parts. The first is tips on preparing your on-screen image. Second, tips on preparing your material. Third, tips on executing your performance. And finally, a few tips on reducing stress and increasing focus. I'm going to start with a short poem from my first poetry collection, which reflects on having focus and being present. Consumed. When you have a handsome mango, wait longer than your wont for it to soften so it yields. Your hunger is irrelevant. You are in service. So peel slowly, strip all sides, trace each curve. Let the trappings drop, purpose past. Cradle your hands, lift gently. Let the fruit taste you. Memory ajar, relish. Keep meeting for the first time. So when you have a reading coming up, you want it to come across fresh and natural and also professional. And this takes preparation because suddenly you're not only a writer, but you're an orator or a performer. It's a privilege and a happy opportunity to present work in public. And it can also make you feel a bit anxious at the same time. So I combat nervousness with preparation. And these tips will help to lower your anxiety, boost your confidence, and increase your effectiveness in connecting with the audience, which is the whole point. First, some tips for setting up your image. Now, when you create your image yourself, what I want you to do is create a private Zoom meeting just for you. And then you can work with these elements: your lighting, your camera, your clothes, and your background. And you want to do all this well in advance. You don't want to wait 5 minutes before and realize that you don't look the way you want. First, the lighting. You need front lighting. That is lighting behind your camera. You don't want to be in front of a light or in front of a window. I actually am in a pretty well-lit room, but I have 2 extra lights that help me to become vivid to my audience. I'm going to turn them off now. So I have a desk lamp and I also have a ring light. Now you can see if I don't have these extra lamps, this is what you get. It's not quite as crisp. The ring light, which you can see now probably reflected in my glasses, has to be lifted up above the level of my head so that I don't get those reflections. If you wear glasses, be aware of that. And then the desk light helps to just make it more even and light up my body. If you don't have extra lamps, you could try moving in front of a bright window or to a brighter room. Second, your camera. You want your camera to be approximately at eye level. So you may have seen in a Zoom meeting where someone was meeting from their laptop on their desk, and you ended up with kind of an odd angle because it was down low. You want to raise that up so that your camera is more at eye level, and you're going to have much better success. It's just going to look more natural. So if you can, you want the distance to the camera be such that your face ends up filling up about half the screen or so. I use a clip-on camera, so an aftermarket camera, which definitely helps. I'm going to remove it now, and so you can see the difference between using the computer camera and the aftermarket camera. So here it is with just the computer camera. You can probably see that the picture is a little more grainy and the audio is probably a little more blurry. I mean, the audio is a little bit more fuzzy, right? So I'm going to plug the other one back in, and you can see the difference, right? How much crisper the picture looks, and the audio is probably crisper as well. So you might want to consider getting a camera, especially if you think you'll be doing more Zoom events. I'm using a Logitech camera. Now, if you're planning to read from a tablet or a phone, it can be a little trickier to determine where you should look. You want to be looking at your camera or near your camera most of the time. On a tablet or a phone, what you can do is set up a Zoom meeting with yourself and another person in another room, and then they can help you to decide where you need to look. Once you figure that out, put a piece of tape there, and that way you'll know where to look as much as possible during your presentation. And then finally, you're also going to have to pick out your clothing. I try and do this the day before. I'll sit in front of my Zoom meeting with 5 or 6 shirts and just try on and figure out which one looks the best, which one I feel most comfortable in. You want to avoid intricate patterns that can get a little weird with the camera. And I would also be careful with white and black, which can make you look like a floating head. Definitely do that in advance. And then finally, you have your background, which you want to, the main thing is to avoid distractions and avoid lights behind you. Avoid the black backlighting. You also want to avoid doors in your background. Anything that is extraneous or distracting, you want to get rid of it. If you have the possibility of putting a book that you worked on behind you, that's nice. People often recommend having a plant in the background. You can see how I've turned my camera slightly to avoid a doorway and a light switch, just to make the background less cluttered. If you don't have the possibility of having a decent background, you can hang a sheet if you want it to be really clean. And the last resort is on Zoom. You can go to the video icon on the bottom left, and there'll be options where you can blur your background or create a custom background. I generally don't recommend those, simply because if you move your hand, it will disappear and then reappear, and parts of your head can disappear and reappear. It's just not the best. But if you don't have an adequate background, you can do that. So lighting, camera, clothing, background. The only other thing that I always like to have available at my workspace is a water bottle, just in case I need it during the course of the talk. Second part is preparing your material. So you're going to choose an excerpt or several short pieces for your reading. And what I would suggest, instead of trying to guess what your audience might want to hear, what I suggest is pick something that gives you a visceral reaction when you read it. A piece of writing that makes you feel something in your body, that makes you smile automatically, that makes you shudder, or gives you a lump in your throat, or touches your heart. Because if you feel something from the material, there's a good chance you'll be able to communicate that emotion to the listener. And that's really important in connecting with your audience. Once you've chosen your excerpt, you're going to want to create a short introduction. a minimal intro of 1 to 3 sentences at the most to frame the context for the audience. And it's great when the beginning can be something really strong and vivid, a concrete image or something funny, recognizable, something intriguing or tragic. You want to start strong and make an impression to really hook your listener. And then you have your document itself. I will often print out or have my file at a larger font, just to make it easier to read. Now, if you're reading on your screen, you're going to want to locate your document close to your camera so that you can easily look, read, do your reading, and at the same time not lose contact with the audience. Now, if you're reading from a book or a paper, it's a good idea to show it. Show them the book. This is what I'll be reading from today. And that way, when you turn away to read, they'll know why, even if they can't see it. If you have papers, if you have loose papers or a book for that matter, and if you're using the mic from your camera, avoid touching your computer with it. The paper moving on the computer can make a terrible noise. And then you're also going to want to prepare a really brief closing, maybe just one sentence to wrap up what you just read, something about the author, the significance of the story, or the rights being available, whatever, and then just thank the audience before you sign off. The third tips that I have are the execution of the performance. So as I mentioned before, I try to combat nervousness with practice. I practice with a timer always. And I record myself in my Zoom meeting so I can look later and check out how the practices are going. Is my performance up to a standard that I find good, that I find interesting? Sometimes I'll do it live for a family member or a friend. Practice is important, reading it out loud, because, and especially if you're doing more than one piece, because the order has to feel right. Now, when you launch into it, here's some things to consider. 1, do not rush. I have often heard talented writers read too fast for their audience, reading down into their paper with no inflection in their voice, and the audience gets bored and lost, and they can't process the words when they come at them that fast. You have to allow time for the words to sink in. You have to speak more slowly than you usually would, and pause at the end of stanzas or paragraphs or phrases. You also should consider editing the work as you read it aloud. Don't feel you have to read exactly as written. If you want to skip a couple lines of description, do that to make the story as effective and digestible and succinct as possible. You time yourself so you can see if you need to add a little material or delete some material. It's always better to be a bit under time, so you leave room for those pregnant pauses. And then you won't be pressured to rush. My second tip about delivery is to inhabit and communicate the emotion of the piece. This is your connection to the listener, where the potential for inspiring your listener and hooking your listener comes from, by communicating the resonance of the emotion across space. This means that you get into the mood of the voice of the writing. See if you can make your voice different, if it's sad or tender at times, or more energized and focused at other times. If a child or a woman is speaking, I will often modulate my voice slightly. Work on being flexible with your voice to be as dramatic as you feel comfortable with. Get into the emotion of the piece. Instead of reading as you, try reading as the voice of the piece of writing. My third tip in delivery is ideation, which is another great tool for embodying the writing as you read. So while you're reading, what I'd like you to try is to visualize the images, the people, and the events of the writing in your mind, almost as if you're watching a movie unfold as you're speaking the words. It takes some practice, but it's very doable. As your voice progresses through the words on the page, practice embodying each line. For example, if I'm reading about cooking crepes with shiitake mushrooms and chard, in my mind's eye, I see the pan, I see the veggies, I see the process unfolding for as long as that scene lasts. If the writing has noise, I imagine hearing it. If it has smells, I imagine smelling them. I'm not just reading words with my eyes. My mind is engaged. My senses are engaged. I visualize all the nouns. I can see them, and I'm feeling in my heart the emotional charge between the words. A successful performance will bring emotions to the surface. And as you expose yourself through inhabiting the work, there's a tacit invitation to the audience to meet you in that heartfelt space. Some will accept it. That's why they came, to be inspired, to be engaged. And in that group synergy, there can be a palpable sense of community, connection, and depth, even through the virtual performance. And then the final tips I have are around focus and gaining calm for your presentation. It's really easy to feel all up in our heads and tense with expectation before a reading about what we're going to undertake. Considering that our voices are situated in our bodies, it's a really good idea to be as present and relaxed in our bodies as possible. So whatever you do for relaxation before a reading is a good time to implement them. One thing I've done to remind myself is to have some sticky notes at my workplace. One says, feel your feet, because I know that when I feel the soles of my feet on the ground, it helps me be grounded in my body. Another is feel my back, because I'm not just my front and my face trying to engage. I'm my whole self, and that helps with my posture as well. And then finally, gratitude. Feeling gratitude, remembering to feel gratitude for this opportunity, to be present in this moment, because I'm sharing something that I feel is valuable with the public. What a great thing. So I've spoken about setup, working with your material, working with your delivery, and with your focus. Using these tips will help your reading be a success. Thanks for listening. Feel free to write to me with any comments. Let me know what works for you. So long for now.